There is a world built on four nations, four elements, and one impossible boy. It is a world that has been studied and rewatched and pulled apart by millions of people over the course of more than 2 decades. And yet, buried deep inside it, past the calligraphy and the martial arts and the carefully tracked lunar cycles, there are questions that the show never answers. Not because the creators forgot, but because some mysteries belong to the world, not the story. They live in the silences between scenes. They hide in the faces of characters who walk off screen and never come back. They sit inside moments that feel complete on the surface, but open into something darker and stranger the longer you look at them. Tonight, we are going to walk through those questions slowly. There is no rush here. The fires of the war are long since out. The comet has passed. The Avatar is at peace. And somewhere in the quiet that follows all of that, there are things left unresolved. Not failures of the show, gifts. Little rooms the creators left unlocked, knowing that the audience would find them eventually, would wander in, and would lie awake wondering. So settle in, let the air around you go still. Find a comfortable position and let your body soften into it. This is not a video that will demand anything from you. You do not have to remember these mysteries or resolve them or form opinions about them. You only have to let them wash over you, like water bending in slow arcs, like the tide that never fully answers the question of where it has been. The Avatar world is one of the most carefully built fictional worlds ever put on television, and tonight we are going to visit the parts of it that do not have answers. The dark rooms, the open doors, the promises that were never kept. Let it hold you. Part 1. The iceberg that should not exist. Let us start at the very beginning. Not with a battle, not with a war council, not with the moment 100 years ago when everything changed and the sky turned red and the air temples burned. Let us start, instead, with two kids in a small boat cutting across a frozen southern sea. The ice gray-blue in every direction. The wind coming off the water so cold it bites through the animation itself. The kind of cold that does not announce itself but simply is, everywhere at once, a fact of the world as fundamental as gravity. Katara is practicing waterbending. She is not very good yet. The water she pulls from the ocean rises a few inches, wobbles uncertainly, trembling like something that has been convinced to cooperate against its better judgment, and then collapses back with a small splash that goes nowhere in particular. Sokka is being Sokka about it. And then Katara, frustrated in the way that talented people who are undertrained are frustrated, throws her hands out in a gesture that has more feeling than technique, and the ice beneath them cracks. Not just cracks, splits wide open, and something glows inside the crack. Something old and blue and impossibly alive, pulsing with a light that has no obvious source and no obvious explanation, and that changes everything. That glow is what starts everything, and it has been there, the show implies, for 100 years. Here is the mystery. Here is the question that lives in the very first minutes of the entire series, the question the show never fully answers, the question that the Avatar Wiki and the Legend of Korra and every supplemental comic and novel and creator interview have failed to definitively resolve. How did Aang survive inside that iceberg for a century? The Avatar state. I know that is the answer that comes to mind first, because it is the answer the show gestures toward. When Aang was caught in the storm, overwhelmed by water and wind and the terror of being completely alone in something too large to fight, he cried out in desperation, and the Avatar state activated. The eyes went white. The tattoos blazed with light. And somehow in that activation, the ice formed around him and Appa, and they were preserved beneath the surface of the southern sea in a pocket of blue light that has been burning without fuel for 100 years. The glow that Katara and Sokka see is the Avatar state still running. It kept him alive. But think about what that actually means, carefully, with the full knowledge of everything the show tells us about how the Avatar state works. The Avatar state is described throughout the show as a state of extreme power and emotional intensity. It is triggered by crisis, by grief, by mortal danger. It is not a meditative state. It is not something you sustain over time. It is an emergency response, the accumulated spiritual power of every avatar who ever lived, flooding through one body in a single overwhelming surge. Every time Aang enters it accidentally in the early seasons, it is terrifying and uncontrolled and almost destructive. It does not gently maintain things. It explodes outward and then releases. It is a flame that burns at its highest at the moment it burns and then goes out. Guru Pathak spends an entire episode teaching Aang that the avatar state is not something to hide inside. It is a state of power, not of rest. The whole arc of the third season, a substantial portion of the show's emotional weight, involves Aang struggling to access it deliberately because Azula's lightning strike in the crystal catacombs of Ba Sing Se broke his connection to it. If the avatar state were a stable, maintainable condition, a kind of spiritual cruise control you could simply set and leave running, this problem would be easily solved. Aang would just hold it. But the show is explicit that it does not work this way. It is a flame that can be extinguished. It is a connection that can be severed. It is not a battery that runs indefinitely once activated. And yet, for 100 years, this 12-year-old boy sustained the avatar state continuously, without interruption, without fuel, without aging a single day, in a block of ice at the bottom of the Southern Sea. 100 years of unbroken spiritual ignition. No example of anything similar exists anywhere in the Avatar franchise before or after this event. There is no other case in the entire universe of the Avatar state functioning like this, not in any other Avatar's history, not in Wan's 10,000-year-old story, not in Kyoshi's 400-year lifespan, not in the records Wan Shitong keeps in his enormous library beneath the Siwang Desert, records that include virtually every significant event in the Avatar world's long history. The ability of the Avatar state to sustain biological life in a block of ice for a century is apparently so unique and so unprecedented that it left no record and generated no legends and was never replicated and was never even mentioned by anyone in the spirit world who presumably would have noticed a century-long sustained avatar state radiating energy from beneath the Southern Sea. It gets stranger. Later in the show, Aang is caught in another terrible storm. Similar weather, similar desperation, similar emotional extremity. He is riding Appa through a storm that threatens to tear them both apart, and the avatar state activates again. But this time, the response is completely different. He does not freeze himself. He does not sink into preservation. He uses the Pao to control the elements and guide them to safety, and then the avatar state releases. Same boy, same state, two catastrophic storms, two completely different outcomes. And the show never explains why. The creators have spoken about this, though never in full detail. They have indicated that the avatar state, as an expression of accumulated spiritual energy from the entire cycle, can manifest in unexpected ways, that the precise combination of desperation and emotional extremity and the spiritual weight of that particular moment called on something the cycle had never expressed before. A kind of deep preservation, a suspension of biological time. That explanation is possible within the logic of the show, but it requires accepting that the avatar state contains a power so different from everything else it does, so specific and so unprecedented, that it was expressed exactly once in 10,000 years of Avatar history and then never again. There is a theory in the fan community that adds something beautiful to this mystery without quite resolving it. It proposes that the preservation was not purely Aang's doing. That Appa, the sky bison, the animal guide whose bond with Aang runs deeper than friendship into something the show calls a spiritual partnership, contributed to the stasis in a way that neither of them could have managed alone. The theory draws on established lore. Sky bison are the original airbenders. The air nomads learned to bend air by watching and imitating them. Appa is not just transportation. He is a living connection to the fundamental source of airbending itself, a thread that reaches back to before the avatar cycle existed, to the time when the elements were first learned by humans watching the creatures around them. His spiritual significance is not incidental to the show's cosmology. It is woven into the foundation of it. The bond between an avatar and their animal guide is described as something deeper than any ordinary relationship. Roku's Dragon Fang chose to die with Roku when the volcano took him, staying when he could have flown free, because the bond was complete enough that separation was not a choice either of them could make. Appa was kidnapped in the second season, and the loss of that bond affected Aang's emotional and spiritual stability in ways that went far beyond the practical loss of transportation. The connection is real, and it goes somewhere the show does not fully map. What if, in that storm, with both of them drowning in cold water and the avatar state activating in response to Aang's desperation, the bond between them functioned as a circuit? What if Appa's own spiritual energy entered the avatar state, and what emerged was not one person's power but two beings' combined capacity, producing something neither of them could have done alone. It would explain why Appa is also perfectly preserved. Because Appa does not have an avatar state. There is no canonical explanation for how a giant flying bison survived a century of submersion in ice without being harmed. The question is almost never asked because the two survivals feel like one event and people accept them together. But they are two separate impossible things happening to two separate beings simultaneously. And if the avatar state is Aang's explanation, what is Appa's? The theory answers both at once. The preservation was theirs together. 100 years of choosing, at some level below thought, to hold on to each other until the world was ready. That glow in the ice is not just the avatar state keeping a body alive. It is two beings in a bond so deep that it defeated time. The show does not say this. The show leaves it open. And in the leaving open, it does something that the best storytelling does. It makes the image in the first minutes of the series more rather than less, adding depth with each viewing, with each theory considered, with each new piece of understanding about what the avatar world actually is and how it actually works. The iceberg glows. And the question of why it glows, properly considered, is not a gap in the story. It is the story's first gift. Drop a comment right now telling me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I love reading those more than you know. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do. It is free and it keeps these nights coming. Now, let us keep going. Part 2, The Face Stealer's Unfinished War. There is a spirit in the Avatar world who lives beneath a gigantic twisted tree in the spirit realm, in a stretch of landscape that feels wrong, in a way that is difficult to name. Not dark exactly. The light exists, but it falls at the wrong angles, and the air has a quality of expectation, as if the space is waiting for something, as if it has been waiting for something for a very long time. The tree itself is enormous, dead or close enough that the distinction stops mattering. Its roots spread in great arcs across pale ground. Its bark has the gray of something that finished dying so long ago it has become architectural. And beneath it, in the cave formed by the roots, there is a spirit who has been collecting things since before most of the Avatar world's history began. His name is Ko. He chose that name himself, derived from the Japanese word kao, which means face. He chose it after becoming estranged from his mother, which happened, by the show's accounting, around the beginning of time. He has been going by it ever since. His mother does not know he chose a new name. His mother does not know very much about him at all anymore. When Aang enters the spirit world in the first season finale to find Ko, the encounter is the most purely terrifying sequence in the show. Not because of action or violence or loud things happening. The scene is very quiet. It is terrifying because of what it asks Aang to do. To sit in the presence of something enormous and ancient and genuinely dangerous and feel absolutely nothing. No fear, no curiosity, no grief, no recognition, no epiphany, nothing. A blank and perfect stillness in the face of faces, cycling across the centipede body of a creature that has been alive since before human civilization, and that will steal your face if you show it you have one. Aang manages this by the narrowest of margins. Ko cycles through faces specifically chosen to provoke a reaction, testing Aang the way you test a locked door, looking for the weak point. He shows Aang the face of a monkey. He shows him the face of an old man with a long beard, a face drawn from no theater traditions that the show's designers researched to ensure their accuracy. He shows him the face of a blue-skinned creature with upward fangs. And then, very briefly, in the way you reveal a card by flashing it, he shows Aang the face of a young woman, hollow around the eyes, absent in the way only something truly missing can be absent. That is Umi. Aang does not know that yet. Neither does the audience, the first time. But that is Umi, the woman who was supposed to marry Avatar Karuk, who died hours before the wedding when Ko reached through the distance between the spirit world and the physical world and simply took the most important part of her. Avatar Karuk's story is one of the most interesting and most underexplored backstories in the franchise. He was a waterbender from the Northern Water Tribe, an avatar of genuine power and significant charm, and he was reckless in the particular way that young people who have never been truly challenged tend to be reckless. Not cruel, not malicious, just careless. He traveled the spirit world freely and frequently in his early years as Avatar, hunting dark spirits not primarily out of duty, but out of something closer to entertainment. He was good at it. He was very good at almost everything. And being very good at things for a long time without consequence can teach a person exactly the wrong lessons about consequences. Ko watched this. Spirits in the Avatar world are affected by human action in complex ways. The relationship between the physical world and the spirit world is permeable, and what humans do ripples through in ways they do not always perceive and cannot always predict. Karuk's casual violence against spirits was not an isolated event. It was a statement, made over years, about how he understood the spirit world and his role in it. Ko disagreed with that understanding, and Ko is very patient. On the morning of Karuk's wedding, Umi was taken, not killed. The show is careful about this. Her face was removed, which is to say the thing that made her Umi specifically, the expression and identity and selfhood that animated a particular body, was extracted and added to Ko's collection. What was left behind was something that breathed but was no longer a person. What Ko carries now, among the millions of faces he has accumulated over thousands of years, is everything that Umi was. Karuk spent the rest of his life trying to get her back. He was 33 years old when he died. That is extraordinarily young for an Avatar. The spiritual illness that shortened his life was the product of too many journeys into the spirit world, each one costing him something that the show does not have precise language for. The toll of crossing back and forth across the boundary between worlds, of entering Ko's territory again and failing each time, of carrying a grief that could not be resolved by anything available to him. He never recovered her face. She is still there, presumably in Ko's collection, somewhere in those millions. The graphic novel series The Search, which finally answers the long-standing question of what happened to Zuko's mother, adds a crucial piece to Ko's mythology. Aang encounters the Mother of Faces, an ancient spirit who creates the faces of every living thing. She meets Zuko's mother. She meets Aang. And when Aang describes his interaction with a certain spirit who lives under a tree and collects faces, the Mother of Faces goes quiet in a complicated way. Her son, Ko, is her child. The spirit who takes faces is the child of the spirit who gives them. They are cosmically opposed in their functions and cosmically connected by blood, and they have been estranged for so long that she did not even know he had renamed himself. She knew him by a different name, the one she gave him at the beginning. He chose Ko and walked away and became what he became without her knowing. Why did they become estranged? The comics do not say. The novels offer nothing. The show gives us only the fact of it. We know that the separation happened near the beginning of time, which means Ko has been estranged from his mother for as long as there has been a world to be estranged in. We know that his compulsion to collect faces, the thing that defines him, the thing he is named after, is at least partly driven by a longing to feel close to someone who creates what he destroys. He cannot reach his mother through love. So, he accumulates the products of her work, building a collection of faces that would fill a world, and none of them bring him any closer to the thing he actually wants. This is the creature who tells Aang they will meet again. And they do not. Not in The Last Airbender. Not in The Legend of Korra. Not in any currently available canon. The promise he makes in that scene, with the quiet certainty of someone who does not experience time the way mortals do, is still there, still waiting, still unfulfilled. Head writer Aaron E. Haas has spoken in interviews over the years about character arcs and storylines that were planned for a potential fourth season that was never made. He has described Azula's planned arc and hinted at other storylines that were cut. Whether Ko's return was among them cannot be confirmed from any public statement. But the promise is there, in the dialogue, written into the show's first season with an intention that reads as deliberate. Ko promised. He does not seem like a spirit who makes promises casually, and he waits, under his tree, with his collection, patient in the way that something truly ancient can afford to be patient. The Avatar will return eventually. They always do. The cycle does not stop. The spiral keeps turning. And when the next Avatar, or the next one, or the one after that finally enters his space under that dead tree, Ko will look up with his cycling faces and say something like, "Ah, there you are. I have been expecting you." He has all the time there is. Part 3. The Man with No Name. I want to talk now about a character who never speaks a single word in the show. He has no dialogue. He has no name that the show provides, only the nickname Sokka gives him, with the combination of irreverence and creativity that makes Sokka Sokka. He appears at the start of the third season, hired to do a specific job, and he pursues that job with the relentless, methodical efficiency of something that has never once been uncertain about its purpose. He is not dramatic about it. He is not theatrical. He simply keeps coming, and then a boomerang hits him in exactly the wrong place, and he disappears in an explosion of his own making, and the show moves forward without giving him a name or a funeral or an explanation. His name, such as it is Combustion Man, and he is one of the most interesting and most deliberately mysterious characters in the entire series. Most Avatar characters, even the ones who appear briefly, have texture. The Cabbage Merchant has a whole silent tragedy. The pirates from the waterbending scroll episode carry the sense of people, with histories and grievances and families they are going home to eventually. This is a show that treats its background characters as people rather than set dressing, and the cumulative effect of that treatment is a world that feels inhabited in the way only the most carefully constructed fictional worlds do. Combustion Man is the exception. He is deliberately and almost aggressively emptied out, and this is not a failure of characterization. It is a choice. Someone in the writer's room, or in the storyboarding, or in the discussion of who this character is and what he represents, decided to make him a mystery. And that decision, like everything in Avatar, means something. What little we know about him comes from outside the show itself. The official Nickelodeon website that once hosted character lore, a site that has since been taken down and survives only in the archival memories of fans who preserved its content before it disappeared, contained a brief description of Combustion Man's background. He discovered his ability as a child. Before he learned to control it, it misfired. The accident destroyed his right arm and his right leg. He was a child when this happened, and the thing that wounded him did not leave. It stayed. It became the defining fact of his life, and the only skill for which he was ever valuable to the kind of people who hired people like him. His metal arm and metal leg are the permanent record of that childhood. He cannot exist in the world without evidence of what his power did before he mastered it. And somehow, from that wound, he went on to master the ability completely, to become perhaps the most individually dangerous bender in the entire franchise, because Combustion Man does not bend fire the way other firebenders do. He does not channel it through stances or arm movements or any of the martial arts forms the show spent considerable resources developing with genuine accuracy. He focuses chi through a tattoo on his forehead, positioned exactly where the sixth chakra sits in Hindu and Buddhist tradition, the light chakra. The chakra Guru Pathik describes to Aang as the seat of insight, the center through which illusion is shed and reality is perceived clearly. And from that point, he projects a focused beam of superheated energy that detonates on contact with a force that waterbending and earthbending combined cannot effectively counter. The technique disrupts the air itself. It is not quite fire, not in the conventional sense. It is closer to the explosive interface between extreme heat and the molecules of air around it, compressed and then released in a concussive burst that has nothing to do with the flowing push-and-pull philosophy of traditional firebending. It looks like something invented by someone who started with a different understanding of bending entirely and arrived at fire from an unexpected direction. The Legend of Korra gave us Pele, the second combustion bender in the franchise's history, confirming that what Combustion Man does is not singular. She has the same third eye tattoo. She has the same ability, perhaps more refined and certainly more controlled. And like Combustion Man, her early history involves being found and exploited by someone with power who wanted to weaponize an unusual ability. She was kidnapped as a child by a warlord. She grew up as a weapon rather than a person. The parallel is exact enough to suggest a pattern. Combustion bending does something to its users. It isolates them. It makes them instruments before it gives them the chance to be people. The chronicles of the Avatar novels push the origin of combustion bending further back to the era of Avatar Yangchen, centuries before Aang. In that period, 3 firebenders appeared who could produce explosions from their minds, the earliest known combustion benders. And even at that earliest stage, the ability was rare, dangerous, and immediately attractive to people who wanted a weapon that could think. There is a fan theory that takes the isolation and the rarity and the specific nature of the technique and arrives somewhere unexpected. It proposes that Combustion Man and possibly Pali have air nomad ancestry. The theory is built on several observations. The physical appearance of combustion benders, their height, certain aspects of their bearing, has a loose resemblance to airbender character designs. The mechanics of combustion bending rely on breath control and internal focus, and a kind of stillness that maps more naturally onto airbending philosophy than onto the aggressive external heat of traditional firebending. And there is an existing community theory about lava bending, the ability to control molten rock, that suggests it emerges in earthbenders with Fire Nation ancestry, proposing that bloodline crossings can produce hybrid elemental abilities. By the same logic, combustion bending could be what happens when firebending and airbending heritage combine. The superheating of air, the internal chi focus, the concentration at the forehead rather than the hands. An ability that borrows from both elements without being fully either of them. The genocide of the air nomads was designed to be total, but the air nomads were nomadic. Not all of them were at the four temples when Sozin's forces came. There were travelers, traders, wanderers, survivors who did not know what had happened until it was over. Their descendants would not be airbenders in any cultural sense. Airbending seems to require the philosophy and practice of air nomad culture to express itself, not just bloodline. But the biology would remain, and combined with the right firebending heritage, it might emerge as something the world has no name for. Combustion Man does not know any of this. He knows he is dangerous. He knows he has metal limbs from an accident that happened when he was too young to be held responsible for it. He knows that the ability that damaged him has made him valuable to exactly the kind of people who measure value in terms of what you can destroy. And he has built an identity entirely from function because function was all he was ever offered. He dies silent. As he lived, the boomerang that always comes back clips his third eye at the right angle to disrupt the chi flow that his entire technique depends on, and the detonation turns inward. It is one of the most physically violent deaths in the show, which tends to obscure death with cuts or camera movements or off-screen sound. Combustion Man dies in a visible explosion in the middle of a scene, and the mystery of what he was, who he came from, whether the air runs in his blood alongside the fire, is simply not answered. The show does not answer it. The franchise has not answered it. He is the most unknowable character in a show full of characters who become deeply known, and in that unknowability, there is something that the show is saying about the people who are turned into weapons before they can become anything else. The tragedy is not that he was dangerous. It is that dangerous was the only thing he was ever asked to be. He walked through the world as a function rather than a person, and the function ended, and nothing was left to remember him by except a nickname and the fact that a boomerang was responsible. The boomerang always comes back. He did not. Part 4. The Society Playing Board Games in the Dark. For almost 2 full seasons of Avatar, Uncle Iroh plays a board game called Pie Show. He plays it everywhere, in tea houses and traveling inns and at small tables in markets. He plays it in Earth Kingdom cities and Fire Nation territory, and in a prison where he has been put as a political prisoner and where most people would not be thinking about tile games. He plays it with genuine joy, the kind of concentrated delight that makes watching him play almost pleasant even before you understand what is happening. He insists that the game is more than a game. He is right, and he says it in a way that sounds like an old man's affectation about a hobby. Zuko is embarrassed by this. He does not understand why a man of Iroh's ability and history has apparently reduced himself to playing board games with strangers in tea houses. In one of the early second season episodes, Zuko stands at a distance while Iroh plays a focused game with a man neither of them knows, and the look on Zuko's face is the specific look of someone trying to project dignity while their guardian does something confusing. What Zuko does not know, and what the audience does not yet know, is that the stranger knows Iroh perfectly, that the game is a conversation, that the lotus tile Iroh places in the center of the board at the right moment is not a strategic move in a game of tiles, but a signal in a language that spans every nation and has been spoken in this form for centuries. The Order of the White Lotus is one of the great slow reveals in Avatar. It earns its moment in the finale because the show has been building it across 3 seasons of small, careful details that look like nothing until they look like everything. The Lotus Tile Iroh insists on finding in the second season, the comment about unusual strategy, the old men who appear in different contexts and turn out to be connected by something that runs deeper than nation or element or wartime allegiance. By the time the Order reveals itself during Sozin's Comet, and these old men burn the gates of Ba Sing Se open and reclaim the Great Walled City in a single night, it feels exactly as inevitable as it should. But the deeper mystery is not the reveal. The deeper mystery is everything the reveal leaves open. The Order began, in the best available understanding from the show and its expanded materials, as a club. Ancient scholars and masters from every nation who found each other across borders that usually prevented such finding, bound by a shared love of Pai Sho and a shared belief in something the show describes as philosophy and beauty and truth. They were the original world citizens, these old people in tea houses, placing tiles and patterns that meant more than they appeared to mean. At some point, the club became an organization. The organization developed a network. The network took on responsibilities. And what began as scholars playing a game became the most influential and most deeply embedded covert society in the history of the Avatar world, with members at every level of society in every nation, operating in plain sight for centuries without being definitively exposed. The logistics of this are extraordinary and almost entirely unexplored. How does recruitment work? The show shows us the mechanism, a game of Pai Sho, a lotus tile placed in the center, a moment where the other person either recognizes the formation or does not. If they recognize it, the conversation shifts. Information passes. An invitation is extended. What is never shown is the conversation itself. What do you say to someone you are about to invite into a secret society that has existed for hundreds of years and that operates in direct opposition to the most powerful military force in the world? What do you say to someone who might say no? How do you protect the society from the person who says no and then tells someone? The members we see in the finale span every nation and every major discipline. Iroh, the Fire Nation general turned philosopher. Pakku, the master waterbender from the Northern Water Tribe. King Bumi of Omashu, an earthbender so eccentric that his eccentricity has served for decades as its own kind of protection. Zhong Zhong, the former Fire Nation admiral who deserted and spent years hiding in a forest. Piandao, the non-bending swordmaster who defeated 100 Fire Nation soldiers when they came to capture him and has been left alone ever since. 3 of these 5 are from the Fire Nation, the nation that started the war, the nation that has been prosecuting a century of imperial conquest, and inside that nation, inside a culture so thoroughly propagandized that its children are taught the war is a gift the other nations should be grateful for, 3 of the Order's highest-ranking members chose something different. They played the lotus tile in the center of the board in places where anyone could walk in. They kept the secret and kept the faith. They waited. Piandao's specific story is particularly worth sitting with. Born to firebender parents, he did not inherit their ability. In a culture that ties identity and status and military worth to bending, this made him an outsider from the beginning. He was left at an orphanage. He could not do the thing his culture had decided was most important, and instead of accepting this as a limit, he mastered the discipline of a swordsman to a degree that made him essentially untouchable in his own country. He rejected the idea that what he could not do defined him, and then he joined an organization founded on exactly that same rejection, the rejection of national identity as the determining fact of what a person is. The Order of the White Lotus is the Avatar world's most sustained argument that connection across borders is not only possible, but is the foundational act of civilization. Every time one of its members places the lotus tile and waits to see if the person across the table knows what it means, they are making a claim about the world. That somewhere in every nation, in every culture, across every border drawn by the wars that humans keep finding reasons to fight, there are people who recognize each other, who see the lotus tile and know. After Sozin's Comet, the Order ceased to be secret. Iroh made the decision to reveal them and deploy them, to use centuries of careful secrecy as a resource that could be spent in one night to change the course of the war. Not everyone agreed with this. A man named Zai Bao believed the reveal was a betrayal of the Order's purpose, that a secret society which disclosed itself had lost the thing that made it powerful. He left. He founded the Red Lotus, which became, in the Legend of Korra's era, a far more extreme and far more violent expression of the same underlying philosophy. The schism was Iroh's responsibility. He made the call. The Red Lotus and everything it eventually did, its assassination plots and its attacks on avatars and its vision of a world without nations, is at least partly a consequence of the decision Iroh made in the firelight of Sozin's comet. Did he know this would happen? Did he consider it? Did he lie awake in his spirit world tea shop in the years after, listening to the nothing of a world at peace and wondering whether the nothing was worth the cost? The show does not say. There is no scene of Iroh with doubts about the White Lotus's reveal. There is only the result. Ba Sing Se free, the order visible, Sai Bao gone into the shadows to build something more dangerous with the same blueprints. There is just the lotus tile, white and clean, placed in the center of the board, and the knowledge that in every city, in every nation, there is someone who knows what it means, and someone else who is waiting to see if it will appear. Part 5. Azula's Fire and What Happened to It. The last image of Azula in the original series is not the one you remember from the height of her power. It is not the walk through the Earth King's palace, composed and dangerous, the person in the room whose stillness makes everyone else's motion seem anxious. It is not the blue fire, precise and temperature precise, burning at a level of intensity no other human in the show achieves. It is not the casual, offhand lightning generation, the technique that took Iroh years of philosophical study to develop, and that Azula performs with the ease of someone snapping their fingers. The last image of Azula is her on the ground. Chains around her wrists. Her fire is ragged, sputtering sideways, hitting the chains and the stone and not aimed at anything because the precision is gone. Her hair, which has been immaculate through 3 seasons, is uneven on one side. She cut it herself at some point before the Agni Kai, in a moment alone in a mirror, using something sharp that was available to her, without care, like removing something that represented control at the same time as the control was being removed. She is crying, not in anger, not in the strategic way she has weaponized every emotion throughout the show, using tears or vulnerability or warmth as gambits in conversations where the goal was always to end up with more than she started with. She is crying in the way that happens when something structural collapses, when the thing that has been holding a person together from the inside gives way and the outside comes down with it. Zuko and Katara watch her. Neither of them looks triumphant. Understanding what happened to Azula requires understanding what she was built to be from the beginning. Her father, Ozai, wanted a weapon that could think. He needed someone ruthless and brilliant and perfectly loyal to his vision. And he shaped Azula toward those qualities beginning in childhood, rewarding calculation and precision and the ability to achieve objectives, dismissing warmth and uncertainty as weaknesses to be suppressed. He did not think of this as harm. Ozai probably does not have the category of harm that parents do to children through love that takes the wrong form. He thought he was preparing her for a world that would demand everything she could give. The result was extraordinary and devastating in equal measure. Azula at 14 is the most effective individual the Fire Nation has produced in a generation. Her tactical intelligence exceeds most adults. Her firebending operates at temperatures and with a control that places her in a category by herself among human practitioners. She generates lightning without apparent effort. She is, by any objective measure of ability and reach, terrifying. And she is also terrified, though the terror is buried so deep it is almost invisible. The cracks appear in Season 3, when she is given unstructured time on Ember Island and discovers that she does not know what to do with a self that is not performing a function. She tries to connect with a boy at a beach party, and the attempt fails in a way she does not understand. He says something genuine to her, and she responds with something withering, because genuine is a language she was never given the chance to learn. He walks away, and for one brief second, the camera catches something on her face that is not contempt and is not calculation. It looks like the specific loneliness of someone who has never been taught how to be a person. The hallucinations that begin in the final stretch of the show take the form of their mother. Ursa appears to Azula in a mirror, and the version of Ursa in the mirror is not cruel. She is kind. She says she loves Azula. She says she has always loved Azula. And Azula, who has been told her whole life that emotions are weaknesses and love is leverage, cries at an imaginary mother's kindness. Then she cuts her hair. Then she names herself Fire Lord. her father already departed to destroy the world, and the emptiness of being given something she wanted when it no longer means anything she expected it to mean is visible in the coronation scene in the way that certain truths are visible. And then Zuko and Katara arrive, and the Agni Kai, and the chain, and the ground. After the show ends, the graphic novels continue. Zuko places Azula in a mental institution rather than a prison, choosing care over punishment, a choice that says something about what Zuko believes is responsible for what Azula became. A year later, she is still in a straitjacket. A year of institutional care has not touched the hallucinations of Ursa or the collapse of her mental architecture. She is removed from the facility when Zuko needs her help to find their mother, and she joins Team Avatar on the search, which is the strangest sentence that can be assembled from those words. They find Ursa. She has no memory of her children. She changed her face and her name and her past with the help of the Mother of Faces. When Azula looks at this woman who is her mother and does not know her, when Ursa's face is eventually restored and she remembers and she apologizes, when Ursa says she did not love Azula enough and she is sorry, something in Azula breaks open that the show and comics had not previously shown us. She runs into the forest. Zuko calls after her. She does not come back. The Smoke and Shadow comics show her years later, more stable in some ways, leading a group of firebenders and working a scheme that looks like treason but is actually something stranger. She has accepted, in her own complicated and still manipulative way, that she will never be Fire Lord. She has accepted Zuko as the rightful leader of the Fire Nation. The scheme she runs in Smoke and Shadow is designed to make Zuko a better Fire Lord by testing him, by providing adversity that forces him to grow. It is still manipulation, but the goal for the first time is not her own elevation. And then she disappears again. The legend of Korra, set 70 years later, does not mention her. Not once. She is the most prominent character from the original series whose ultimate fate remains completely unaddressed in the sequel. There is a theory, unconfirmed and perhaps unconfirmable, that an elderly firebending healer who appears briefly in The Legend of Korra is Azula in her old age. The evidence is circumstantial. The age is right. There is something in the bearing, but nothing confirms it. Head writer Aaron Ahas has said publicly that he always intended for Azula to have a redemption arc, longer than Zuko's, harder. She had farther to fall before the falling would turn into something else. A potential fourth season that was discussed and never made might have given her that arc. It was not made. What we have is the girl on the ground, crying in chains. And the open question of what that moment was the beginning of, whether it was the first crack in a structure that might eventually open into something livable, or whether it was simply the end. The show does not decide. It trusts you to hold the question. Maybe that is the most honest thing it could do for a character that complex. Not give her the clean arc. Not resolve the question of what happens after everything falls apart. Just leave her there on the ground, with the chains and the ragged fire and the uneven hair, at the beginning of something the show is not going to tell you about. Maybe she found the forest. Maybe the forest was enough. Maybe, somewhere in the distance from everything she had been, she learned to breathe without a purpose. The show does not say. Neither does anyone else. Part 6. The Ancient Art Nobody Remembers. Near the end of the third season, with Sozin's comet days away and the weight of every remaining decision pressing down like atmosphere, Aang walks in his sleep away from the island where the group has been arguing about whether he has to kill Ozai. He walks off the beach and onto something he does not immediately recognize as not an island. He stands on its surface in the dark, barefoot, and begins to feel through the soles of his feet that the ground beneath him is moving. Not settling, not shifting, but moving the way something living and very large moves when it becomes aware of something very small standing on it. A lion turtle, the largest creature in the Avatar world, the last of its kind. It has been in that stretch of ocean for longer than Aang's entire civilization lasted, disguising itself as land to avoid the species that almost hunted it to extinction. It has a full forest growing on its back, rooted into its shell, the trees mature and full canopied as if they have been growing there for decades. And when it lifts its head from the water and speaks to Aang, its voice is the slowest thing in the show. Not slow because it is stupid. Slow because it has been alive so long that it has learned to take its time. The lion turtle gives Aang something that solves the problem that has seemed unsolvable. Not just the practical gift. the ability to bend another person's life energy and strip them of their elemental power without killing them. But the conceptual key, the frame within which energy bending makes sense, before the Avatar, before the Four Nations, before any of the bending disciplines as they currently exist, there was something older. People did not bend the elements. They bent the energy within themselves. The elements came later. The energy was first. Energy bending, the oldest art. The one that was here before everything else. And here is where the mystery begins. The Avatar Wiki, drawing on supplemental materials the creators have confirmed, notes that Aang was not the first Avatar to learn this art. Across the 10,000-year cycle, a handful of his predecessors had encountered energy bending. Very few had used it, because the danger is extreme. To bend another person's energy, your own spirit must be unbendable, and if it is not, the other person's force consumes you. But some avatars knew. Some had the knowledge. None of them taught it forward. Every avatar inherits the accumulated experience and spiritual power of every avatar before them. This is established clearly and repeatedly throughout the show. When Aang enters the avatar state, he draws on the power of every predecessor. The memories, the skills, the accumulated lifetimes of learning, all of it flows through the connection between avatars. If even one avatar in 10,000 years understood energy bending deeply enough to preserve the knowledge in the cycle, why did Aang need to find the lion turtle? Why did his past lives not simply show him? There is one possible answer that the show hints at without stating. The avatar state carries what the cycle has chosen to carry. The past lives are not a neutral archive of everything every avatar ever experienced. They are, presumably, a curated transmission, shaped by choices made over thousands of years about what to pass forward and what to keep back. It is possible that the avatars who knew energy bending chose not to encode it into the cycle, not out of selfishness, out of caution, out of the understanding that putting this particular power into a chain of reincarnating souls, any one of whom might use it irresponsibly, was more dangerous than keeping it as a thing discovered in extremity, rather than inherited as a matter of course. That theory, if correct, means that the avatar cycle contains secrets. Not just knowledge, but deliberate absences, gaps left intentionally, things that the avatars collectively decided should not pass down the chain. Which raises the obvious question of what else might be missing. What other arts? What other understandings? What other powers that previous avatars decided were too dangerous to inherit, choosing to be the last generation to carry them rather than handing that weight to the future? And then there is the lion turtle itself. After Aang learns from it and leaves to face Ozai, the lion turtle does not appear again, not in the finale's aftermath, not in the Legend of Korra's many flashbacks and references to Aang's era. Not in any of the comics or novels. The last lion turtle in existence, the living connection to the era before the Avatar cycle, the only creature in the world who remembered the original form of bending, simply goes back to being an island somewhere in the ocean. Or it does not. It might have died after its meeting with Aang. It might have moved somewhere. The franchise offers no information. By the time of the Legend of Korra, Korra herself has energy bending, received from Aang directly, passed from avatar to avatar in the most intimate way possible, and she uses it in ways Aang never had the chance to explore. She cleanses dark spirits with it. She opens and closes portals. She creates a spiritual projection of herself. Energy bending in Korra's hands is a much broader and stranger ability than it was in Aang's, shaped by the different circumstances of her life and her different understanding of the spirit world. But the lion turtle that taught Aang, the original teacher, the living remainder of the world before the Four Nations existed, has vanished from the story so completely that it might as well have been an island after all. The irony is almost too neat. A creature that survived 10,000 years by pretending to be something it was not taught the Avatar how to save the world, and then went back to pretending, maybe it is still there. A particular island in a particular stretch of ocean, too remote to be commonly visited, with full-grown trees and no records in any library. Maybe it is waiting for the next time the cycle needs something that the cycle cannot provide for itself. Maybe it is patient in the way that something born in the era before the Avatar can afford to be patient. Or maybe it is the last of its kind, in every sense, and its conversation with Aang was the last thing it had to offer. The franchise has not decided. The question is open, and in the openness, the creature remains what it was from the beginning, the oldest mystery, the deepest root, the thing that was here before everything else, and might still be here after everything else has changed. Part 7. Iroh's Other Journey. In the second season, Iroh says something quiet and significant, and then the show moves forward without dwelling on it. He is speaking to Zuko about a period in his past, the years between the death of Lu Ten and the beginning of the events of the show. The years when he was not the Dragon of the West, and not yet the person Zuko knows him as. The years in between, which the show acknowledges existed but never fully enters. He says he spent time in the spirit world. He says what he found there changed him, and then he pours something and the conversation shifts, and the subject does not come back in any real depth for the rest of the series. We are left with the fact of a transformation and almost no information about its mechanism. What we have are fragments. We know that during or around this period, Iroh visited Ran and Shaw, the last two surviving dragons, who are hidden within the ruins of the Sun Warrior civilization. The Sun Warriors are the remnant community that has preserved the original firebending tradition, the one that predates the Fire Nation's nationalist martial arts version, the one that came from dragons rather than from the ideology of conquest. Iroh was publicly known to have slain the last dragon. He lied. He had found Ran and Shaw alive and hidden them, protecting them by claiming their deaths. And from them he learned what firebending actually is. Not aggression, not will, imposed on matter. Something closer to the original thing, the dancing of energy, transformation itself expressed as heat and light. The same philosophy, the show implies, that underlies all four bending disciplines when they are practiced in their purest form. Not force, not domination, but participation in the fundamental processes of the world. The Iroh who emerged from his spirit world journey and his encounter with the dragons is so different from the Iroh who preceded these events that the difference barely seems like the same person. The general who wrote cheerful letters home from Ba Sing Se about burning the city is not recognizable in the man who makes tea for strangers and cries at Zuko's moments of growth and sits across from enemies offering them something warm to drink. The transformation was that complete. And the question of exactly what in the spirit world produced this transformation has never been fully answered. The fan theory that Iroh encountered the lion turtle is appealing because it provides a mechanism, something ancient and patient and completely outside the framework of Fire Nation nationalism would have the power to reorient a person's sense of time and scale and consequence. In the presence of something that has watched the rise and fall of nations from the bottom of an ocean, where it disguises itself as geography, personal ambition becomes very small. The desire to be Fire Lord becomes a very small thing. The grief of losing a child becomes not less painful, but contextualized differently, situated within a longer story, made meaningful in a different way. Whether it was the lion turtle or something else in the spirit world, the mechanism of Iroh's change remains one of the show's most carefully maintained mysteries. The show wants you to know that he changed, and to see what he changed into, and to trust that the change was real and complete. It does not want to explain it, because some transformations lose their power in the explaining. Some things are true at the level of result without needing to be documented at the level of process. But there is a darker theory about Iroh that lives in the fan community, one that is less discussed than the spirit world theories, but that has structural support the show provides without intending to dwell on. Was Ozai responsible for Lu Ten's death? Let us walk through what we know. Iroh was the older brother. He was the crown prince. His son Lu Ten would inherit after him. Ozai wanted the throne. He was ambitious in the way that people who cannot feel satisfaction are ambitious, always calculating toward the next position, the next advantage, the next thing that might finally feel like enough. And he could not take what he wanted while Iroh stood in his way. Lu Ten died in the siege of Ba Sing Se, Iroh's siege. The operation Iroh was commanding in person, present with his army, leading the assault. Lu Ten was fighting on the front lines of a battle his father was present for. Iroh failed to protect him. The show attributes this to the chaos of a prolonged siege, the impossibility of protecting a single soldier even when you are the general, the specifics of military reality. That is plausible. Battles are chaos. Generals cannot be everywhere. People die in front of fathers who love them and cannot stop it. But Ozai had resources, palace advisors, intelligence networks, and a very clear understanding of what Liu Ten's death would produce. It would not, on its own, give Ozai the throne. He still had to arrange Azalon's death and manufacture a succession claim, but Liu Ten's death would eliminate Iroh's will to contest it. It would devastate Iroh in the specific way that made everything else possible. It would turn the greatest firebender of his generation into a grieving man who no longer wanted to be Fire Lord. Ozai killed his own father through Ursa's hands. He burned his own son's face. He treated his daughter as a weapon from childhood. The capacity for exactly this kind of ruthless calculation is not only possible for Ozai, it is consistent with everything we see him do when we see him. The show never confirms this. No character raises the possibility. Iroh never suspects it, or if he does, he never speaks of it. In his spiritual journey and his transformation and his devotion to Zuko, there is no visible trace of a suspicion about his brother that has been consciously suppressed. But consider what it would mean if Iroh, very slowly and very quietly, over the long years of transformation, came to understand something about his brother that he could not prove, and could not address, and could not make disappear, and chose, anyway, to respond with love, to make tea, to be kind to strangers in tea houses, to play Pai Sho and place the lotus tile and trust that the world can be made better one quiet conversation at a time, even knowing that his own grief might have been manufactured by the most destructive person in his life. If Iroh knows, if he has considered it, the show does not open that door. It leaves it there, in the dark of what the show does not enter, with just enough light coming through the crack to see that it exists. Part 8. The Quiet Questions. This part is slower. Let the pace drop another level. Let the words come at the speed of the hour before dawn, when everything is still enough that small sounds become large, and large things become possible to sit with without being overwhelmed by them. These are the smaller mysteries, the ones that arrive on a third or fourth watching, past midnight, when the architecture of the world has become familiar enough that the gaps start to show between the familiar things. The first is about bloodbending. In the third season, the elderly waterbender Hama reveals the technique she developed during decades of imprisonment. Blood is mostly water. If you can bend water, you can bend blood. And if you can bend blood, you can move what the blood moves through. She can do it only during the full moon, when waterbending is amplified to its maximum, and the show presents this limitation as inherent to the technique's mechanics. The legend of Korra then shows us the Yakon family performing bloodbending in daylight, without a moon, as casually as ordinary waterbenders move water. The show attributes this to exceptional talent, a level of waterbending ability so advanced that the lunar limitation no longer applies. Katara learns bloodbending in the Puppet Master. She uses it to stop Hama. She hates herself for it immediately, in a specific and lasting way that the show does not ask her to perform for the audience but simply shows. She swears she will not use it again. She breaks the vow once, under extreme pressure, and the weight of that second use is visible in the scene's aftermath without being discussed. And then she becomes the greatest waterbender in the world. She lives for decades. She teaches the Avatar. She becomes a legend. At no point is it addressed whether Katara could bloodbend without the full moon if she chose to develop the ability. Whether she is, like the Yakon family, capable of it in daylight. Whether the most powerful waterbender in the world, who was trained in the technique by its inventor, has a limitation that the show describes as experiential rather than absolute. She has a locked door. The show respects the locked door by not showing what is behind it, and the magnitude of what Katara is choosing not to do, the scale of restraint embedded in the absence of a thing the show never shows, is visible only if you look at the gap where it would be. That gap is the shape of a choice made every day, without drama, without announcement, by someone who knows exactly what she is choosing not to do. The second quiet question is about the dragons. In the episode The Firebending Masters, Zuko and Aang find Ran and Shaw, the last two living dragons. They are kept alive by a small surviving community of sun warriors who have protected them in secret for the entire 100 years of the war. And when the dragons breathe fire over the two young men standing before them, the colors are extraordinary. Ran is red. Shaw is blue. One of the last two dragons in the world breathes blue fire. Azula's blue fire, the show's most striking visual indicator of her exceptional ability, the thing that tells you immediately she operates at a different level than other firebenders, is the baseline output of a dragon. What does that mean? Is Azula bending closer to the original nature of dragonfire than any other human firebender? Is her blue flame evidence of some ancestry or connection to the ancient tradition that everyone else in the Fire Nation has moved away from? Or is it simply that fire reaches blue at its highest achievable temperatures, regardless of whether the bender is human or dragon, and that Azula has pushed the art to the same extreme the dragons occupy naturally? The show never addresses this. Azula never meets the dragons. She never knows. The most distinctive thing about her, the thing the show uses to mark her as uniquely dangerous, is apparently the color a dragon produces without effort. The third quiet question is about what the Fire Nation knew. Sozin's genocide was designed to be total. He attacked all 4 air nomad temples simultaneously, using Sozin's comet's power to ensure that the new avatar could not escape. He did not succeed entirely. Aang was not home, but the rest of the air nomads, by every available account, were killed. And then 100 years passed. No avatar appeared. 3 successive Fire Lords prosecuted a century of war without the Avatar arriving to stop them. There were Fire Sages who monitored the connections to Avatar spirits. There were scholars. There were intelligence networks more sophisticated than anything the other nations could match. And not one of them seems to have seriously raised the question of whether the Avatar was missing rather than dead. The most comfortable conclusion became doctrine, became assumption, became belief so deep it was no longer examined. The Avatar cycle ended. The genocide worked. Nothing to investigate. This is how ideology protects itself. The first lie is deliberate. The subsequent ones are sincere. And by the time Katara's waterbending finds the iceberg, the entire Fire Nation establishment has been living inside a comforting story for a century, and the comforting story is about to crack open and glow. Part 9. The Spirits Who Walked Away. The spirit world in Avatar is experienced almost entirely from the outside. We see what it does to people who visit. It confuses them. It shows them things they are not ready to see. It strips away comfortable lies and leaves people with the raw material of whatever truth they could not face in the physical world. The show gives us the effects without fully explaining the mechanism and the mystery of what the spirit world actually is, as opposed to what it does, remains one of the most beautifully unexplored areas in the entire franchise. What is a spirit? The show offers impressions rather than definitions. Spirits seem to be beings of a different quality of energy than physical creatures, related to the physical world but not bounded by its rules. They are affected by human action and human emotion in ways that are not always chosen and cannot always be predicted. Hei Bai, the forest spirit who attacks an Earth Kingdom village in the first season, is not naturally violent. He became violent because the Fire Nation destroyed his forest. He was changed by something done to the physical world he was connected to, reshaped by a wound he did not choose to receive. This is the Avatar world's consistent spiritual logic. Spirits are not separate from the world they correspond to. They are expressions of it. What happens to the forest happens to the forest spirit. What happens to the moon happens to the moon spirit. The worlds are permeable to each other in ways that mostly express as consequence, as ripple. Ko is anomalous in this context because he does not follow this pattern. He is entirely self-directed, moving according to his own logic, pursuing his own agenda across thousands of years without apparent influence from external events. He does not change based on what happens around him. He simply continues. He is an outlier among spirits the way a person without empathy is an outlier among people, not defined by the absence of feeling but by the immunity to it. The spirit oasis at the Northern Water Tribe presents a different kind of mystery. Tui and La, the moon and ocean spirits, have lived for thousands of years as koi fish in a small enclosed garden at the spiritual center of the Northern Water Tribe. They swim their slow circles, push and pull, and in their swimming they maintain the fundamental balance between the sky and the sea that underlies all waterbending. They chose to become mortal. They chose to cross from the spirit world into the physical world and take a form that could be held and killed, a hand reaching into a pond. And when Zhao kills Tui, the moon goes dark and the ocean becomes erratic and every waterbender in the world loses their power simultaneously, and the price of the choice to be mortal is paid in full. Why do they make that choice? The show gives you the practical explanation. Their presence in mortal form grounds the connection between the worlds in that corner of the planet. But embedded in the practical is a choice. and the choice is the mystery. The Avatar world's most consistent spiritual teaching, carried through everything from Guru Pathik's chakra lessons to the philosophy of each bending discipline, is that connection requires presence. That you cannot be genuinely part of something you cannot be hurt by. That love, in whatever form it takes, requires choosing to be vulnerable in a world that can use vulnerability against you. Tui and La chose to be fish in a pond, small and mortal and reachable. They chose the form that put them genuinely inside the world, rather than observing it from a safe distance in the spirit realm. And Ko, in the same world, has lived for thousands of years in his barren lair, unreachable and untouchable, with millions of faces and no one who has freely chosen to stay in his presence. The show never draws this comparison. It never says, here is what it looks like to choose love, and here is what it looks like to refuse it. It simply places both of them in the same world and leaves the comparison open for anyone who spends enough time sitting with the question. The spirit world also has geography that is never fully mapped. Certain locations appear consistently across visits. Ko's lair, certain groves, the crossroads where Aang meets his past lives. But the geography does not follow physical rules. Iroh, speaking to Korra in The Legend of Korra's second season, explains that the spirit world is shaped by the inner state of those who enter it. The weather changes based on how you feel. The terrain reflects what you need to see. Distances can collapse or expand depending on your state of mind. This means that what Aang experiences when he visits the spirit world is partly a product of what Aang brings to it. The version of the spirit world Aang sees is Aang's spirit world, shaped by his specific grief and wonder and love. The version Iroh visited during his years of transformation was Iroh's spirit world, the landscape of a man breaking apart and beginning to rebuild himself. We cannot assume that the spirit world is consistent across visitors, that what one person sees bears a reliable relationship to what another person would see in the same location. Which means that when we try to understand the spirit world from the fragments the show provides, we are working from deeply subjective evidence. The spirit world that Aang navigates is the one his interior life made visible. And the real spirit world, the one that exists independent of any particular visitor's psychology, remains as unknown tonight as it was when the series began. Part 10. What the mystery feels like. We have been walking for a long time tonight. The iceberg and the glow, the face stealer's unfulfilled promise, the silent man with the metal arm, and the forehead tattoo that blows things apart. The society of scholars in every city, playing board games and waiting. The girl with the blue fire on the ground. The ancient art that somehow everyone forgot to teach. The general who became wise through grief and the brother who might have manufactured that grief. The quiet questions about what Katara chooses not to do, and what color fire burns at its extreme, and what the Fire Nation told itself for a century. None of these questions have answers tonight. Not definitively. Not in any official source that closes the door and locks it. Some of them might be answered eventually, as the Avatar world continues to be built and expanded. New films, new stories, new chances for the gaps to be filled. But some will stay open permanently, and some were always meant to. There is a particular quality to an unsolved mystery in a world you love. In a world you do not care about, an unanswered question is just a gap, an oversight. Something that should have been addressed. You note it, and you move on. In a world you love, the unanswered question becomes evidence of the world's reality. Evidence that it goes further than any story told inside it. Evidence that it has corners the camera never found, stories happening off the edge of the frame, lives being lived in the moments between episodes that no screenplay captures because no screenplay was ever meant to capture everything. The iceberg should not be possible. And the fact that its impossibility is never explained, that the show simply presents it and trusts you to receive the mystery without demanding the answer, is not a failure of the show's craft. It is an expression of its confidence. Confidence that the world it built is real enough to contain things that cannot be explained. Think about the people you love. Think about the parts of them you do not fully understand, the versions they were before you met them, the choices they made in moments you were not present for, the things that shaped them that you can only infer from the person they have become. You do not find this mysterious part of them threatening or disappointing. The mystery is evidence of depth. It is proof that they extend further than any single angle on them can show, that they are three-dimensional in the most literal sense. They go somewhere you cannot see. Avatar does this with every major character. It gives you Ko and declines to give you Ko's resolution. It gives you Azula crying on the ground and trusts you to wonder what comes after without providing it. It gives you Iroh rebuilt from grief into something that heals everyone he encounters and does not show you the rebuilding itself. It gives you Combustion Man, fully formed and silent and devastating, and lets him remain exactly as mysterious as a person becomes when they are never given the chance to explain themselves. And underneath all of it, the first mystery, the one the show opens with and never closes, the boy in the ice and the glow that should not exist, and the century of waiting, the philosopher Simone Weil wrote that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. That genuinely looking at something, giving it the full and undefended weight of your awareness without agenda, is an act of love, the quiet kind, the kind that does not announce itself. The creators of Avatar attended to their world with that kind of love. They attended to the martial arts and the calligraphy and the lunar cycle and the sleeping position of a blind girl who turns off her sight by lifting her feet from the ground. They attended to the color of fire at its extreme and the sound of bending when the bender is afraid. They attended to the names and the architecture and the music and the pauses in the music and what the silence means. They built a world with enough care that the questions you find inside it are as interesting as the answers, because the questions are evidence that the world goes somewhere the story could not follow. Tonight, these mysteries are company, not problems to solve, not frustrations or gaps, just presences. Rooms the show left open, questions that have been waiting in the margins, lit by the glow of an iceberg that should not be possible, available to anyone who comes looking in the dark. So, let them be present. Let them do their quiet work alongside you. Let the iceberg glow. Let Ko sit under his tree with his collection and his patience and the name he chose when his mother stopped knowing him. Let Azula be somewhere she does not have to explain herself, maybe healing, maybe already transformed into something the show never got to show us. Let Combustion Man rest in the mystery of what he was before he became a weapon. Let Iroh pour tea in the spirit world, in the tea shop he built in the place he chose to stay, surrounded by something very old and very patient. Let the two fish swim their slow circles in the pond at the center of the Northern Water Tribe's spiritual heart. Push and pull. Push and pull. The most fundamental forces in the Avatar world, expressed in the most vulnerable form possible, choosing every day to be small enough to be held, small enough to be hurt, small enough to be part of the world they keep in balance. Let Aang sleep, not in the iceberg anymore, not in the 100 years of dreaming, just in the peace that came after, the peace that he earned, in a world that is not perfect but that is no longer at war. And that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. Close your eyes. Let the water move in its slow arcs. Let the ice be blue and the fire be quiet and the air be still and the earth be steady beneath you. The Avatar world is out there tonight, existing in the minds of everyone who loves it, carrying its mysteries intact, waiting to be returned to. And you will return. On some future night, when you come back to the first episode and hear the crack of ice and see the glow, you will remember what you learned here tonight about what the glow might mean, and the episode will be both the same and different, and the world will have gained another room that you can now walk into. That is what it means for a story to be alive. Not that it answers every question, but that it keeps giving you new questions to carry, new rooms to find, new reasons to come back. This one is very, very alive. And so are you, wherever you are tonight. Good night. If this video carried you somewhere or kept you company in the dark, please leave a like. It means more than you might think, and I read every comment. And if you want more nights like this one, more slow walks through the deep parts of stories worth loving, please subscribe. There is so much more of this world to explore. I will be here when you come back. Good night. Script: Baldhead Lore, Avatar, The Last Airbender ASMR Mysteries Series. Deeper mysteries. What the show leaves open. Additional mystery. The 100-year silence and what it cost. There is a question buried in the premise of Avatar that the show answers emotionally but never quite answers logically. If the Fire Nation knew the Avatar would be reborn as an air nomad after Roku's death, and if the genocide of the air nomads was intended to eliminate the Avatar before he could be trained, why did the Fire Nation stop looking so thoroughly and so quickly? The answer the show provides is practical. After 100 years with no avatar appearing, the Fire Nation establishment accepted that the problem had been solved. The avatar was gone. The cycle was broken. The war could proceed without interference from the one person in the world capable of bending all four elements. But that acceptance was based on an assumption that was, by any rigorous strategic analysis, premature. The Fire Nation did not kill Aang. Sozin's forces killed every air nomad they could find, but Aang was not home that night. He was somewhere over the Southern Ocean, trapped in a storm, encased in a glacier. The attack killed all 4 air nomad temples worth of people, but it did not kill the avatar it was designed to kill. And in 100 years, not one Fire Nation strategist seems to have asked the obvious follow-up question. If the avatar was reincarnated as an air nomad, and if the genocide was not 100% confirmed successful, what is the probability that the avatar survived? What is the probability that they are out there, somewhere, hidden or lost or simply not yet known? Why are we assuming this was solved when we have no proof of the avatar's death specifically? The answer, I think, is ideology. Fire Lord Sozin built something during his reign that was more durable than any military conquest. A system of belief about what the Fire Nation is and what it deserves and what the war is for. And ideology has a particular relationship with evidence. It uses confirming evidence and ignores disconfirming evidence. Sozin needed the Avatar to be gone for the project of the 100-Year War to make sense, and so the Avatar was gone. The story said so. The propaganda confirmed it. 3 successive Fire Lords grew up inside this story and never thought to question its foundational assumption. There is something genuinely chilling about this in the context of what the show is doing. The Fire Nation is one of the most sophisticated and technologically advanced civilizations in Avatar, capable of engineering the most complex military and industrial operations in the world. And it was defeated, ultimately, not by military force but by an error in its own narrative, by a story it told itself that was not quite true, by a Fire Lord who died before verifying the most important outcome of his reign. The Avatar was not gone. He was sleeping. And the story of his absence, told with such confidence by so many people for so long, became more real than reality for an entire civilization. That is a specific kind of horror that has nothing to do with bending. Additional mystery. What the Avatar state actually is. The Avatar state is the show's single most powerful and most discussed ability, and it is also one of the least fully explained. The show describes it, demonstrates it, builds narrative arcs around its loss and recovery, but the underlying mechanics remain deliberately vague. Aang enters the Avatar state for the first time in the very first episode, and the sequence is overwhelming. The white eyes, the tattoos blazing, the water rising around him in a massive column, the entire iceberg exploding upward. It is the single most visually striking moment in the show's first season. And it raises a question that takes 3 seasons to partially answer. What is this, really? What is actually happening? The best explanation the show provides, across multiple episodes and multiple sources, is something like this. The Avatar is a bridge between the human world and the spirit world. In the Avatar state, the Avatar draws on the accumulated power and knowledge of every Avatar who has ever lived, every previous incarnation of this same spiritual bridge across all the generations of the cycle. 10,000 years of avatars, all of them pouring through one body simultaneously. That is an almost incomprehensible lowbound of power. And Guru Pathik, in the 2nd season, makes clear that this power comes with a price. The Avatar state is not controllable, while the Avatar is emotionally blocked. It activates in response to crisis or trauma or extreme emotion, and in those moments, the Avatar inside it, the specific individual who is the current incarnation, is essentially subsumed by the collective. The person disappears into the power. If you kill an Avatar in the Avatar state, you end the entire cycle. The connection is severed, and no future Avatar is born. But here is what the show never fully explains. What is the relationship between the current Avatar and the accumulated past Avatars in a normal interaction? The show implies that past life memories and wisdom are available to the current Avatar through the Avatar state, but the Avatar can also apparently communicate with specific past Avatars without being in the Avatar state. Roku appears to Aang multiple times in visions and at the spirit shrines. Kyoshi appears in more direct and more startling ways. Past avatars can be reached intentionally, through meditation and the right circumstances. So, the avatar state is not the only way to access the past. It is the most extreme way. The way in which all of them come through at once rather than one at a time. And Aang, over the course of the series, gradually moves from having the avatar state as something that happens to him to something he can control, to something he can choose. What is lost when he makes that choice? What is the difference between the avatar state as a crisis response, with all the uncontrolled power of 10,000 years, and the avatar state as a deliberate tool? The show implies that the controlled version is less powerful, that something is lost when you choose it rather than need it. But what exactly is lost is never specified. And there is the deeper question, the one the show opens in the third season and never closes. What happens to the avatar cycle when the current avatar dies, before learning all four elements? When Aang dies in the Crystal Catacombs, struck by Azula's lightning, Katara revives him. But the show treats this as a genuine death event, not a near death. Aang died. And the avatar state, which he had been disconnected from since Ba Sing Se, was not active when it happened. So, what happened to the cycle in that moment? The Legend of Korra eventually addresses the question of avatar cycles being disrupted, with Korra's own near-death experience in the third season creating a permanent consequence for the cycle's accumulated past lives. But the specific mechanics of what happened when Aang died in Ba Sing Se and then came back are never fully clarified. The show treats it as resolved because Katara's spirit water revived him. The cycle presumably continued, but the precise mechanism of what spirit water does that is different from ordinary revival, what it does specifically to the avatar cycle rather than just to a body, remains unexplained. The avatar state is the most powerful thing in Avatar and the least fully understood. It is the show's most deliberately mysterious mechanical element, and after 61 episodes plus an entire sequel series, the question of what it actually is, what the connection between a current avatar and 10,000 years of predecessors actually means, in terms of identity and consciousness and continuity, remains genuinely open. Additional mystery. The dragons that should not exist. The show establishes early in the third season that dragons were hunted to extinction by the Fire Nation. The tradition of dragon hunting was begun by Fire Lord Sozin as a way of demonstrating power and valor. Anyone who killed a dragon earned the title of dragon. The practice continued across the 100-Year War until the last known dragon, supposedly killed by Iroh, secured him the title of Dragon of the West. Iroh lied. He found Ran and Shaw, the last two living dragons, and hid them within the ruins of the Sun Warrior civilization. He claimed their deaths to protect them. And when Zuko and Aang find them in the Firebending Masters, they are alive, ancient, larger than anything else in the show. But think about what the protection required. Ran and Shaw are enormous. They are the size of buildings. They breathe fire in colors that would be visible from a significant distance. They move through the sky. How did Iroh, or anyone, hide two creatures of this size and this obvious visibility from the most industrialized military power in the Avatar world for decades? The Sun Warriors helped, clearly. The existence of the Sun Warrior civilization as a functional hidden community within the territory the Fire Nation claims to control is itself a mystery. The Fire Nation has been conducting military operations and resource extraction and colonial administration across the Earth Kingdom for 100 years. How did a civilization of people with their own culture and sacred sites and traditional practices survive hidden within that territory? The show implies that the ruins of the Sun Warrior civilization are remote and difficult to reach, presented as ancient and abandoned to any Fire Nation official who might investigate. But the Sun Warriors are not dead. They are living there, maintaining the flame, tending to the dragons, keeping a tradition alive that their colonizers believe they have eliminated. This is perhaps the most hopeful hidden detail in the show. Not everything the Fire Nation believed it had destroyed was actually destroyed. Some things survived by becoming invisible, by letting the story of their destruction be told and accepted while the actual thing continued in the silence behind the story. The dragons that the Fire Nation believed it had hunted to extinction were never extinct. They were simply hidden. And the woman who became the greatest waterbender in the world after spending years training a reluctant student, the man with the tea and the wisdom who turned out to be the last standing obstacle between Ozai and total victory, And the people who kept the original firebending flame burning all have this in common. They survived by letting themselves be believed gone. There is something about Avatar's treatment of cultural survival that is worth sitting with slowly. The show is deeply invested in the question of what happens to things that are supposed to have been eliminated. The air nomads were killed. Their culture, their music, their vegetarianism, their way of moving through the world, their relationship to air and to life and to letting go, survived in one boy. One boy carried all of it through 100 years of ice. And when he woke up, the culture was still there inside him, intact and real, and the most distinctive thing about him in every room he ever entered. The dragons survived, the sun warriors survived. The true nature of firebending survived in the dragons that the Fire Nation thought it had exterminated. The waterbending tradition survived in a stolen scroll and a teacher who trained his last student too well. The earthbending tradition survived in ordinary people who had never done anything except live in their homes and refuse to leave. The show's most consistent argument, made through 100 small examples and never stated directly, is that some things are more durable than the people trying to destroy them, that the things worth preserving find ways to persist. Additional mystery. What happened to Sokka's sword? In the third season episode Sokka's Master, Sokka trains under the master swordsman Pian Dao and learns to forge a sword from a piece of meteorite that falls near their location. Meteorite metal, space iron, a sword made from something that fell from beyond the sky. Pian Dao commends him for his unique approach, for choosing a material no earthbender could bend, which makes the sword both philosophically and practically distinctive. Sokka carries the sword through the rest of the season. It is part of his growth as a warrior. One of the show's most sustained arguments that non-benders are capable of genuine power and genuine contribution when they develop their specific skills, rather than trying to compete with benders. The sword becomes part of who Sokka is, in the same way the meteorite bracelet Toph forms from leftover metal becomes part of who she is. A gift and a symbol, at once. In the finale, during the destruction of Ozai's airship fleet, Sokka loses the sword. He and Toph and Suki are hanging from the underside of an airship. The fleet is being taken out, and in the chaos of holding on and not dying, the sword goes over the edge and falls. Sokka watches it fall. And then the immediate crisis is over, and the war ends, and the show wraps up beautifully in its closing scenes. The sword is never mentioned again. The boomerang returns in the final scene, which is a moment of comedy and completion. The sword does not. This is not an oversight. Nothing in Avatar is an oversight. Sokka's sword disappearing and not being recovered is a deliberate choice. The question is what the choice means. One reading is purely practical and narrative. The sword was a vehicle for a character arc. Sokka learned something specific from Pian Dao. Not just how to fight, but how to approach any skill with his own particular way of thinking about problems. The sword carried that lesson while it needed to carry it, and then the lesson was learned and the sword was not needed anymore. The boomerang comes back in the final scene to complete a different arc, the one about always returning to where you came from, about the water tribe always being part of who Sokka is. The sword was an addition. The boomerang is him. Another reading is darker and more interesting. Sokka loses everything in the finale that was not already part of him before the war began. The sword is made during the war, trained under wartime conditions, forged from something that fell from the sky in what was practically a combat exercise. It belongs to the war the way a lot of things belonging to the war belong to it. When the war ends, those things are not always available for retrieval. The boomerang comes back. It always comes back. Water tribe muscle memory, bone, and sinew, the things Sokka was doing before any of this started. The sword was something he learned during the war, and the war is over. Maybe some things you earn in wars do not survive the peace. Or maybe Sokka went looking for it eventually. Maybe a year after the end of the war, he retraced the flight path, estimated the landing zone, and found it in the Earth Kingdom somewhere, buried under debris from the airship crash. Maybe he brought it home and put it on a wall where it stayed, a monument to the year that changed everything, something to show his grandchildren with the words, "I made this from a piece of the sky." The show does not say. It leaves the sword where it fell, and what that means is yours to decide. Additional mystery. The geography of everywhere Aang has not been. Avatar's world map is one of the most carefully designed fictional geographies in animated television. Fans have spent years reconstructing it from travel times and dialogue references and visual background details, and the results are impressively consistent. The distances match the time spent traveling. The climate zones correspond to latitudes. The terrain changes in ways that make meteorological sense for a world of the Avatar world's approximate size. But most of what Aang sees in his journey is the areas in conflict, the Earth Kingdom's major cities, the Northern Water Tribe, the Fire Nation's more accessible regions during the Undercover arc, the Southern Water Tribe, which by the start of the show has been reduced to a small settlement by decades of raids, fragments of the world at its edges. What lies in the parts of the world the show never visits? The show implies there is more. The Sandbenders of the Si Wong Desert are a tribal society distinct from the Earth Kingdom's mainstream culture. The Swamp Tribe in the Foggy Swamp is a water-bending community that has developed a philosophy and a relationship with their environment that is completely different from both major water tribe cultures. The Sun Warriors are an entire civilization hidden in plain sight. The world contains multitudes beyond what the show's travel arc covers. The most tantalizing, unseen corner of the world is the eastern coast of the Earth Kingdom. The show never takes Team Avatar there. The major population centers we see are on the western side or the interior. What lives on the eastern coast? What cultures developed there with their own relationship to the Earth and their own traditions? And beyond the edges of the map, the show establishes that the Avatar world is a planet, with poles and equators and ocean currents. But the known landmasses, the four-nation map that the show operates within, cannot be the entire surface. There must be other continents, other peoples, other cultures with their own relationships to the elements, their own histories, their own encounters or lack of encounters with the Avatar cycle. No Avatar story has yet explored what lies beyond the known world. The franchise remains, in terms of geography, almost entirely focused on the same set of landmasses. And out beyond the edges of that map, in the parts of the planet that no story has yet claimed, there is a world that no one has told yet. Maybe it is full of people who have never heard of the Avatar. Maybe it contains bending traditions that developed in complete isolation from the four-nation system, following different rules and different philosophies. Maybe the spirit world looks completely different there, reflecting a completely different relationship between humans and spirits that developed without the Avatar as the bridge. The unknown geography is the biggest mystery the show never addresses, because it never acknowledges it as a mystery. It simply stops the map at the edges and trusts that you will not ask what lies beyond them. Beyond them is a question that might never be answered. Beyond them is the rest of the world. Additional mystery. The night Avatar Kyoshi lived 400 years. The show mentions, somewhat casually, that Avatar Kyoshi was the longest-lived Avatar in the cycle's history. She died at 230 years old, which is already extraordinary, but the Kyoshi novels imply she may have been even older than that, with her lifespan possibly closer to 400 years in certain interpretations of the timeline. 400 years. Living from one era into another completely, watching the world change across centuries in a single continuous human experience. How? The show does not explain it. The Avatar state provides power, but there is no established mechanism by which it extends biological lifespan to that degree. Ordinary bending masters grow old. Iroh is old. Pakku is old. Long lifespans exist in the Avatar world, but 400 years is not an extension of ordinary longevity. It is a fundamentally different relationship with time. The Kyoshi novels hint that she may have used earthbending techniques related to her connection to the earth itself, drawing on the stability and permanence of stone to extend her own. An earthbender who has truly mastered the philosophy of her element, who has become in some sense as patient and immovable as the earth, might express that mastery in biological terms as something like durability. But this is speculation from supplemental material, not confirmed show lore. The show simply mentions that Kyoshi was very old and leaves the mechanism unexplained. What would it mean to live 400 years, to watch generations come and go, to see the children of people you knew become old and die themselves, to see the cities change around you, to see technologies emerge that did not exist when you were young, to carry memory across time spans that history books usually cover with an entire chapter, to be, yourself, walking history. Kyoshi's lifespan means she was alive during periods of Avatar history that are otherwise completely unrecorded. She knew things about the world that no one else could know. She was, in some sense, a library. And when she died, at whatever age the correct account gives her, an entire section of that library closed. Aang had access to her, in theory, through the Avatar state. He could have asked her anything. He could have had a 400-year span of living memory available to him. The show shows him accessing Kyoshi most often in moments of moral crisis, when her particular brand of ruthless pragmatism provides a counterpoint to his pacifism. But what she knew about the world from simply having been in it so long, the history she carried in her experience rather than her ideology, is something the show never explores. The longest life in the Avatar cycle. And the things she learned across it are mostly in the gaps between the stories that have been told. Additional mystery. The Last Airbender's relationship to his own title. Avatar, The Last Airbender is the show's title and also the description of its protagonist. Aang is the last airbender. After Sozin's genocide, no other practitioner of airbending exists in the world. He is the single surviving member of an entire civilization. He is responsible for keeping alive not just a bending tradition but an entire philosophy of life. The show handles this with great care in terms of Aang's emotional relationship to the loss. His grief for the air nomads, his guilt about surviving when they did not, his complex feelings about responsibility to a culture he loves, all of this is handled with sophistication across 3 seasons. The show does not require him to perform grief at scheduled intervals. It simply lets the weight of the loss be present in him, visible when it needs to be visible. But there is a dimension of his situation that the show touches on without dwelling. Aang is 12. He is the last practitioner of an entire way of life. And when he thinks about what it means to preserve that culture, he is working with a child's understanding of what culture is and how it survives. He knows the airbending forms, he knows the philosophy, or as much of it as a 12-year-old monastic student would have absorbed before the world ended. He knows the music, perhaps, or fragments of it. He knows the food, having been a vegetarian his whole life without having to choose it. He knows certain stories and certain practices and certain values. Is that enough? Is the sum of what one 12-year-old absorbed in 12 years of monastic life sufficient to be the foundation of a cultural revival? The show implies yes, ultimately. The air acolytes who appear briefly in The Legend of Korra are people who studied under Aang and preserved what he preserved. Airbending re-emerges after the harmonic convergence with a new generation of benders who then train under Tenzin. The culture survived, but what was lost? What parts of air nomad culture existed in the people who were killed, rather than the forms and the philosophy and the values that one 12-year-old boy carried out of the southern temple into a storm? What music died with the monks that Aang did not know? What stories were only known to the elders? What practices required practitioners who were not children to transmit them? Aang is called the Last Airbender because he is the last person who bends air. But in another sense, every air nomad who died was the last person who knew specific things, and those things are gone. The culture that survives through Aang is not the culture that existed before Sozin's comet. It is a reconstruction, a sincere and loving reconstruction built on the best available material. But a reconstruction nonetheless. The show does not present this as failure. The reconstruction is real and the love behind it is real, and the culture that emerges is genuinely continuous with the one that existed before. But the gap between what was and what survived, the specific things that were lost because they existed only in people who died, is a grief that the show acknowledges in Aang without fully naming. He is the last airbender, and the weight of that word, last, is the weight of every specific thing that died with the people who carried it. Every song and story and practice and way of seeing the world that existed in the minds of people who were not him. He carries what he carries, and the rest is silence. Additional mystery. The spirit world's relationship with time. Here is something that Iroh mentions to Korra and that the original series implies without ever stating directly. Time in the spirit world does not work the way it works in the physical world. Not in the obvious way, not in a way the show uses as a plot device, but in a more fundamental and more disorienting way. The spirit world is not a place that exists alongside the physical world on the same timeline. It is a place that exists in relationship to the physical world through something other than sequential time. What does this mean in practice? When Aang enters the spirit world to find Ko in the first season, the journey takes what feels like minutes in the physical world, but the encounter with Ko is extensive, a conversation that has the quality of a long and deliberate exchange. When Aang travels the spirit world in the final episodes, the experience compresses and expands in ways that do not map onto the siege happening in physical time simultaneously. And Iroh, who spent years in the spirit world during his transformation and who chose to remain there after his death, has been in a place where the relationship to time is fundamentally different from the physical world for an unknowable subjective duration. When Korra meets him in the spirit world's second season, he has clearly been there long enough to build something, to establish himself, to become a kind of resident rather than a visitor. But the physical world has been continuing on its own timeline in the meantime. What does it feel like to be Iroh in the spirit world? To exist in a relationship with time that is not sequential, while simultaneously knowing that in the physical world, the world you loved and the people you loved in it, sequential time continues? Zuko has aged. His children have grown. The world has changed enormously. And Iroh is in the spirit world, in his tea shop, with a relationship to all of that is not absence exactly, not presence exactly, but something the show does not have language for. The spirit world's relationship with time is the show's most significant unexplored mystery because it underlies so many other things. It is why Ko's patience does not feel like waiting. It is why the ancient spirits do not experience their age the way a very old person would experience it. It is why the spirit oasis feels timeless in a way that is not metaphor but literal mechanism. Time in the spirit world is not like time anywhere else. And what that means for the consciousness of every being who lives there permanently is something the franchise has never fully investigated. Additional mystery. The four nations before the war. Avatar establishes its world almost entirely in wartime. Every piece of the four nations that we see is seen through the lens of an ongoing 100-year military conflict. The Fire Nation is an imperial aggressor. The Earth Kingdom is a defender with enormous resources but no strategic coherence. The water tribes have been systematically weakened. The air nomads are gone. But the show drops hints, scattered and specific, about what the world looked like before Sozin. The friendship between Sozin and Roku. The Fire Nation colonies on the Earth Kingdom's coast, which were being established even in Roku's time, and which Roku failed to stop. The Sun Warriors, still alive. The Order of the White Lotus, already ancient. Dragons, still common enough to hunt. The air nomads, as a culture rather than a tragedy. What was daily life like in a world at peace? Not at peace in the absence of conflict, which is not the same thing, but genuinely at peace, in the era when Roku traveled all four nations to learn the elements, and people from different nations could apparently move through each other's territories without the constant threat of the war. What did trade look like? What did diplomacy look like? What did the exchange of culture, music, food, ideas look like between nations that were not actively trying to destroy each other? The show gives us fragments. Omashu's mail system, Ba Sing Se's class structure, which predates the war, the Northern Water Tribe's architecture, the Fire Nation's pre-war technology. These things existed before Sozin. They were built by people living in something other than crisis, and the air nomad temples. The show only shows us the temples in ruin and in memory. We see them as Aang remembers them from childhood, the warmth and the flying and the lemurs and the training. We see the desolation afterward, but we never really see what they looked like as living places. What it felt like to walk into the Southern Air Temple on an ordinary day, with the monks going about their ordinary business, with the students training and the animals living their animal lives, with the wind coming through the open spaces in the way the architects intended, a people who built their homes to welcome the element they loved. The world before Sozin is the great absence in Avatar's story. It is the world that the war killed, and its loss is felt most powerfully in the things the show briefly shows us and does not elaborate on. A world where an air nomad and a Fire Nation citizen could be friends, where travel was possible, where the four nations were not enemies but participants in the same world, where Iroh could be a different kind of general, one who had not yet had any reason to question what his nation was doing. That world existed, within the living memory of the oldest characters in the show. Iroh was old enough to remember. Bumi was old enough to remember. The air nomad genocide happened 86 years before the events of the show, and King Bumi, who was Aang's age and Aang's last living year before the iceberg, would have been a teenager when Sozin attacked. Bumi was there. He was alive. He watched the world change from the before to the after, and he lived through it all. And he is now 112 years old and completely insane, in the specific way that someone might be completely insane if they had watched the world break apart when they were young and then spent 100 years trying to figure out how to exist inside the broken version. The world before the war is not a mystery the show investigates, but it is a mystery that every frame of the show is haunted by. The sense that everything you see was once something else. That under the war, under the ruin, under the occupation, and the propaganda, and the grief, there is a world that used to be possible. The show's whole arc is the attempt to get back to that world. Not to restore the before, which is gone, but to create an after that is better than the during. And the specific quality of the before, what was actually there, is something the show trusts you to feel as an absence rather than showing you as a presence. Additional mystery: what makes someone a bender? One of the most fundamental questions in the Avatar world is never directly answered in the original show. What determines whether a person is a bender? Why does one child born to firebender parents inherit the ability while their sibling does not? Why is Piandao the child of firebenders who cannot firebend? Why can Toph bend but not Sokka? What is the mechanism? The Legend of Korra's second season provides the mythology, the story of Wan and the lion turtles, and the original granting of bending. In the era of Wan, the lion turtles gave bending to people through energy bending. Humans were not born with it. It was granted. And in Wan's time, it was not even permanent. You received the ability when you left the city and gave it back when you returned. Something changed between then and the Four-Nation era. Bending became inheritable. The ability that was once externally granted became part of the biological and spiritual inheritance that passes from parent to child. What changed? The show implies that the Avatar cycle itself, the permanent presence of the Avatar as a bridge between worlds, created the conditions under which bending became heritable. But the specific mechanism is not explained, and even within the system as it currently exists, in the era of the show, the inheritance is not simple. Not all children of benders become benders. Some children of non-benders become benders. The ability does not follow family lines with the predictability of a simple genetic trait. It follows something more complex. The Avatar world's most consistent explanation involves spirituality. Bending is not purely a physical ability. It requires the spiritual connection to the element. Airbending requires the detachment and freedom of air nomad philosophy. Earthbending requires the patience and permanence of the Earth's character. Waterbending requires the adaptability and flow of water's nature. Firebending requires the inner fire, the drive and energy that fuels change. This suggests that bending might be partly a matter of what you are, not just what you inherit. That the spiritual orientation that makes someone capable of bending a particular element is not purely determined before birth, but develops through life, through how a person grows, and what they value, and how they relate to the world, which would explain why not all children of benders become benders. If the spiritual component matters, then children who develop different spiritual orientations than their parents might not express the inherited ability. But this creates questions about cases like Toph, who developed earthbending in complete isolation from Earth Kingdom culture, raised by parents who were horrified by her ability rather than nurturing of it. Her earthbending did not come from the cultural transmission of Earth Kingdom philosophy. It came from something else. Something in her that recognized itself in the earth, in the darkness and the permanence and the willingness to stand firm. The nature of what makes someone a bender, and why some people are benders and others are not, is the Avatar world's most foundational, unanswered question, not addressed in any satisfying detail in the original show. Approached but not resolved in the sequel, still open, still waiting for someone to walk into it and find out what is actually there. Sokka is not a bender, and the show's most sustained argument, made across 3 seasons of his story, is that this does not matter. That his strategic mind, his humor, his loyalty, his creativity, his capacity for love are forms of power that bending cannot match and that the world cannot afford to be without. The show does not answer the question of why Sokka is not a bender. It asks a more interesting question instead. What does Sokka do with the fact that he is not? And the answer is everything. He does everything with it. Closing. The last word on unsolved things. There are questions in the world of Avatar that might never be answered. The iceberg's glow, Ko's unmet promise, the art that nobody taught, the man without a name, the girl who ran into the forest. Some of these questions will eventually be answered. The Avatar franchise is still being built. New stories arrive in different forms, and some of them will close doors that have been open since 2005. Others will open new doors that nobody knew were there. But some questions were never meant to be answered. Not because the creators forgot or ran out of time, because a question left open is not a failure. It is an invitation. An invitation to keep thinking, keep wondering, keep returning. The Avatar world is built in part from unsolved things, the same way the physical world is built from mysteries that science has been working on for centuries without exhausting them. The world does not run out of questions. Neither does a world built with enough care. The things you do not know about the world of Avatar are part of what makes it real. Real worlds have unreachable corners. Real histories have gaps. Real people have rooms in them you cannot enter. The mystery is the texture of reality, and a story that tries to explain everything produces a smooth surface that the mind slides off of. Nothing to hold, nothing to return to. Avatar holds you. It has been holding people for 20 years, and it will hold people for 20 more because it was built with enough care to contain genuinely open things. Questions that are not rhetorical. Rooms that are not staged. Gaps that are not oversights. They are gifts. Every one of them. And tonight, in the quiet, in whatever corner of the world you are in, at whatever hour this is reaching you, the Avatar world is holding you too. With all its mysteries intact, with the iceberg still glowing, and Ko still waiting, and Azula somewhere in the forest, and the old art hidden in a space between what the lion turtle knew and what the cycle chose to keep. The questions are company. They are very good company. Sleep well. Final note. On the nature of loving a world. There is something that happens when you spend years with a story. Something that is not just familiarity and not just affection, but something closer to the way you feel about a place you grew up in. You know its streets not because you memorized them, but because you walked them so many times that the knowledge moved from your head into something lower down, into the body, into the kind of knowing that does not require thinking. The world of Avatar is like that for a lot of people. And the mysteries it contains, the questions it leaves open, the rooms it never fully enters, these are part of that knowledge too. You know them not as gaps but as presences, not as things missing but as things waiting. The way a familiar house has rooms you have not entered in a while, rooms you know are there, rooms you can feel at the edge of the warmth when you are sitting somewhere comfortable and letting your mind drift. Tonight has been about those rooms. The iceberg room, the room where Ko keeps his collection, the room where Iroh sat in the spirit world and let his grief become something else. The room at the end of the forest where Azula might have arrived. You do not have to enter them. You just have to know they are there. The Avatar world will be here tomorrow. Unchanged. Still holding all its questions in the same places. Still glowing with the same light in the same iceberg at the same moment in the same episode you have watched 100 times. And the 100th and first time, you will notice something new. You always do. That is the promise the show makes. Not the promise of answers, the promise of depth. It keeps that promise every time. Good night. And when you wake up, the Avatar will still be there. The world will still be there. The mysteries will still be waiting in their places, patient as Ko under his tree, patient as the moon tracing its arc, patient as the earth beneath everything. Go to sleep. The questions can wait. They have waited this long. If this video helped carry you to sleep or you found yourself genuinely lost in these mysteries, please drop a like. It genuinely helps more than you might imagine. And if you want more nights like this one, more slow walks through the deep parts of stories you love, please subscribe. There is a lot more of this world left to explore. I will be here, and so will you. Good night from wherever this reached you. Sleep well.